we're back. Happy Friday again. Once again, we've got a great Friday here in the UK. We've got a holiday weekend coming up, and it's fantastic for everybody joining us here today, including our very special guest, Leo Cremonezi, which I completely butchered, but I gave it a try. Leo's amazing. This is going to be a really, really fun session because Leo has 20 years experience in statistics and statistical science, but really where he's applying that today is at the Financial Times and coming up with all of the rankings that you see out there in terms of schools and best places to work, universities. Leo is the guy that heads that up and runs that over at the Financial Times. And, I think it's so important for everybody because when you think about it, the university that we go to is one of the biggest decisions in our life. And I know that all of us look to these rankings to kind of help make that decision, both on the hiring side and on the student side. So Leo, thanks for being here and giving us kind of an inside look at how things work.
Hello, Asim. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Yes, here at the FT, I think our readers love the rankings we produce. Our readers are very competitive. They really like the rankings, not only business education rankings, which is our flagship, but all the rankings, best places to invest, best startups to invest, best places to work, and so on. So, yeah, let's talk a little bit about it.
Absolutely. I mean, it's one of those where you need the information, right? And kind of how you come up with that information, how you make sure that these kind of rankings are authentic and honest, because people are making such big decisions off of them, is definitely that we want, something that we want to hear and understand. But before we go there, Leo, I understand that you also help with the reviews of business books that get published on the FT, and so maybe you can kind of give us one of the particular ones that you've liked so far that's kind of already been published that maybe would be useful for the audience.
Yes, as part of my job, I also have to, everything related to business, not only business school, business education, but business in general, startups and so on. And I help the team with some business book reviews. And I'd like to actually to recommend two of them.
Okay.
I think it's important to mention as well that different from other media publications, we review the book before it's published. So, of course, we can't mention names and titles over here, but these two have been published already. So I would like to recommend them. One is 4 days a week, which is quite nice, I think, this book, because it explains from both sides, employer and employee, how we would work and so on. I think it's a very nice one because it's not only, it's going to be only 4 days a week. Oh, thank you. It's very good and so on. But what would happen, with the companies, employers and employees, if we adopted this approach 4 days a week. And another one is from CIA to CEO. I forgot the name of the author of this one because it's difficult to pronounce her name, but the title is From CIA to CEO. It's basically this lady that worked for CIA for many years, basically all her career, and wrote this book explaining techniques and tactics from CIA and how it can be applied for in companies. I would say it's a manual for CEOs. So I would recommend these two books.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, I've put them on my reading list. I imagine that 4 days a week is going to be one that's a hot topic for a lot of people, especially as we head into a 4-day work week next week here in the UK with the bank holiday coming up.
And it's happening already, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's been some huge pilots that have happened here in the UK. It almost seems like the UK might be leading the way in some ways on testing out the concept.
Yeah. Let's see how it goes.
Amazing. Well, we'll put those on the reading list, and maybe Leo, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your career. How did you kind of find yourself heading up the rankings division over at the FT?
Well, I've been working with market research data since 1998. Yeah, when I started as a research analyst at Ipsos Brazil. I was still studying. The way it happens, I was still studying statistics, doing my graduation, and Ipsos back then invited a few students to do some data modeling, some statistical analysis for the data collected. And this is how I started. We were basically a group of students helping to, I don't know, let's say enrich the usual analysis done for market research data collected. And I remember that back then the processes were, I mean, very manual. All the checks, the data checks were very manual, 5 to 10 people checking the same thing, same tables. But I believe that because I had this opportunity to go through all these steps since the beginning, I can now advise better on how to automate all these processes using more modern software and more interesting data collection platforms. But to talk about the journey, in summary, we were always trying to see the big picture, right? Not only the statistical analysis, but how the clients could benefit from a more interesting, or let's say a more sexy analysis for the data collected. So we had to write a lot, like lots of papers and summaries on how to correctly interpret the statistical outputs and the impact these results would have on the decision making. So this is how I started writing about key driver analysis, about market segmentation, and more recently about machine learning, AI, the more modern topics. So now I'm here at the FT, responsible for the rankings, which is exactly that. The data is collected using questionnaires, via surveys, analyzed using some statistical methods, and then we have to write about it in a way that the readers can understand and keep coming back to read more what we produce. So yes, I would say that at this stage of my career, it's more a mix of knowing well about data analysis, how to use the correct stats techniques, and writing in a way that people can understand and make the right decision using
That's
what we
super
publish.
fascinating. That's really fascinating. I mean, I think we had this conversation a lot with researchers and analysts and statistics people that it's just becoming so much more important to be a storyteller at the end of the day,
Yes.
right? That as much as you can kind of go in and put together data tables and 60 slide reports with a bunch of charts and crosstabs, at the end of the day, what matters is the story, right?
Exactly.
And it's really interesting to kind of hear that career progression, because effectively what the FT is doing is it's market research plus the story. And that
Exactly.
story part is important now for everybody, no matter which organization you sit in. If you're doing this for a publication like the FT, or if you're doing it for internal insights or market research at a large FMCG company, the storytelling matters.
Exactly. And you have to know very well the topic you're talking about in order to write in a way that would catch the attention of the reader and make them engaging with the story. And so for example, I publish the rankings. So what's the most important thing in the rankings? The ranking, the order. So we have to make it very clear to understand why the order is that way. It's like very clear in our methodology and so on. So these are all heavily based on stats analysis. So how to make it clear and easy and light for the prospective student to make the right decision. So that's the main thing. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about, on your journey, like where did you kind of pick that up? I mean, it's not always common that somebody with a statistics background who's very data oriented in the way that they think to also be a good writer and storyteller. How are you able to merge those two? And what advice would you give people that are coming from that kind of real data oriented statistics background to help them kind of make that switch to become a good storyteller?
Yeah. I mean, it was basically like explaining to my parents what I was doing as a statistical scientist, because
Right.
they are both, I mean, they're retired now, but they were both doctors. Yeah. So I would say, Dad, I'm working on something called segmentation. Yeah. Look how interesting it is, because and then you start explaining very carefully, because I knew the statistical techniques I was using, because I was in the uni and so on, or in my masters and whatever. So these are the techniques, but I won't explain the techniques, but this is the outcome.
Yeah.
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 So this is how we
Exactly.
use it, how the clients could use that. And then if you know how to explain well that subject, you just have to write down that. I think that's the
Right.
next step, isn't it? So if you have an
Right.
idea for a book, I know what's going to be, I know what you want to talk about and so on. And then you have the idea in your mind and then you just like put it on a paper. And I think this is what I was
Interesting.
doing my graduation masters. And so it's just like explaining to someone,
Mm-hmm.
ex-girlfriends, parents, and so on. So explaining to someone, so look how exciting a key driver analysis is, or
Right.
how to do a ranking is, and so on. And
Right.
then people, oh yes, no, I can understand. And so, okay, so now I just have to write down. So this is what I was doing all the time,
Interesting.
writing down, and then this is what I'm doing now, and I love it.
Interesting. Interesting. And tell us, like, how does it work at the FT? Is there kind of like a length component to this? That you've got to fit it into a certain length. I think one of the things that I see a lot of times with market researchers is that they want a big deliverable, right? They want, a 60-page report that they can send back to kind of make the investment worthwhile. And so they kind of use that to cheat, right? To say, okay, well, I
Mm.
can just throw a bunch of stuff in here and then I don't have to be crisp with my storytelling. Do you kind of find that that's a forcing function, the way that it maybe works with the FT, or kind of the way that the editorial process works?
I think here, in my case at least, is I
Mm-hmm.
don't write every day.
Yeah.
I work under a special reports. So I basically, what I do in terms of publication, we do
Mm-hmm.
magazines. Yeah, I don't
Yep.
do broadsheet, everyday writing and so on. So although I have a more time to work or produce a magazine, let's say the best global MBAs in the world, this is a magazine, this is a
Mm-hmm.
special report,
Mm-hmm.
it takes more time to make it, very beautiful and so on, very accurate, very correct. Because just to explain a little bit the process, so we have two
Yeah.
surveys. Let's talk about the global MBA
Yeah.
ranking, which is one of our flagships. Yeah. So we have two surveys. Yeah, one with schools, one with alumni that
Right.
graduated 3 years ago. So we have two data sets that we have to fuse, clean, check, and so on, in order to have the data warehouse with everything we need to start the calculation of the ranking, using statistical techniques and so on. Yeah. So this is the first step. And then once we have the table, we have to make sure that everything's correct, that, you have the
Mm-hmm.
right schools and so on. Meanwhile, you have to start contacting schools about profiles. They don't know that they're
Mm.
ranked, but you have to, okay, so what happened? New faculty, new courses, new
Mm.
programs, and so on. And the commissioning editors start commissioning all the articles, professors to talk about AI, deans to talk about innovations, and so on. So think about a magazine with the table in the middle,
Yep.
profiles, and then 6 articles before the table, 6 articles after the table. So the whole team, the business education team, which I lead as well, we are all working together to put this piece out.
Wow.
So, and we don't do
Wow.
only this one, we do all our rankings are magazines. So it's the whole year basically following this
Wow.
process. So yeah, we have more time. We have to write. It has to be beautiful, accurate, and so on. But it takes a long time. It's not an article that you write today that we publish tomorrow, like
Right.
a business book review.
Right.
To make it to produce a magazine, it takes sometimes 4 to 5 months, depending on
4 to 5 months.
yeah,
Right. Right. Because you're kind of doing this initial data collection, starting
yes,
to see some of the
yes.
themes. That's then pointing you in the right direction for where you maybe need to get more information, where journalists can start to go to kind of find the stories. Right. Is that kind of how it works?
Mhm.
Makes sense. Makes
Exactly, yeah.
sense.
And a lot of editors involved as well, to make sure, I'm reading it, but I'm not making sense of that. So we have to rewrite. So it takes time, like to make it beautiful and nice.
Where does that kind of first checkpoint come in? So, once you've kind of collected that initial set of data from these first two surveys, when do you start to bring in the editorial to say, hey, maybe this is a theme that we want to go and investigate? Like, how does that process work between the data and the survey collection and actually finding these stories for the editors and the journalists to kind of go and chase down?
Yeah, I think the first point is even before the data collection is the questionnaire, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
The
Mm-hmm.
questionnaire has to be clear and perfect in order for you to correct the correct, to collect the correct data you want
Right.
for the ranking. So the
Right.
questionnaire has to be clean and done in a way that people can read and understand and give us what we want.
Right.
Okay, and then since we extract the data from data collection platform is when we start the data cleaning. So for example, I've noticed that a lot of missing answers for this question. Why? Because people don't want to answer some specific question about salary, about career progression. So we have to rethink for the next wave or the next time we're doing the same survey. How can we change the word in order to capture more, answers for that question? So as we say, no data is data, because we can go to the commissioning editors and say, like, there is something happening here, or trends about demographics, where people are going to for their business education and so on. So these are all things that we check in the beginning of the process that could become a story, or at least a charticle, as we call it here. So
Say that
this is how
again.
it goes.
What is that? A chaticle?
Charticle, yeah,
Charticle, right?
it's an article with instead of images, you have charts. So
Yeah.
basically, less writing and more data visualization.
Amazing.
So this is how it goes, basically. So it's interactive every day, talking.
Right.
Oh, now I'm at this stage, and what I found out is XYZ. So we're always
Yeah.
in communication with the editors, and this is how it
And
goes.
this is really fascinating because you can kind of start to see how the storytelling piece is kind of interwoven throughout the entire process, right? It's not that you just hey get some data tables back and then you start to come up with some stories, right? It's
Yeah,
really you're thinking through it every step of the way, right? Whether it's in actually building the questionnaire, starting to do the data cleaning and knowing some holes, or starting to question why people didn't answer certain things. I just think that it's a really interesting lens to put on the market research process, right?
yeah,
Because at the end of the day, again, everybody's a storyteller here, right?
exactly.
And whether you're doing a large brand tracking study or a large concept testing study or market penetration study, it's a similar thing, right? I mean, that study ends up taking 2 to 4 months. You've got to kind of design the questionnaire. You've got to come and look and do the data processing and the data cleaning, and maybe it kind of creates a few add-on questions. But I do think that that's one thing that a lot of market researchers miss is you got to have that storytelling cap on the entire way, right?
Yeah,
It's not just, okay, now we've got some charts. Now let's come up with a story that actually almost every single step in this process, you've got to be thinking about, okay, are we capturing this story? Are we
exactly.
asking that in the right way?
Who is the audience? Did I write it correctly in a way that will capture the answer I needed, response rates and so on? You have to think about everything. Or is an older audience? We are talking about executive MBA students, so average age 40,
Right,
42. So they are more educated. So let's put a level above. And so you have to think about everything. And
right,
questionnaire is the beginning. Yeah.
right. So let's talk a little bit about you mentioned response rates, right? And this is a unique kind of audience that you're going after. This isn't kind of your traditional, hey, you're just going to an external panel and kind of incentivizing people to respond. You need people to respond to these surveys that are in the right audience. How do you think about response rates, making sure that you get enough data? Tell us a little bit about the challenges that come on the response rate side.
Okay. For us, working with data collected via surveys, we rely on what people respond to our
Right.
surveys to do our job. Yeah. So I would say that response rates are everything,
Yep.
and is everything, and we need to keep it healthy and find ways to keep people of all generations that I mentioned. We do like with younger generation, older generation engaged with the service. But I've noticed that more recently, response rates are going down, not only here with our surveys here in FT, but talking to colleagues at the Royal
Right.
Society, Royal Statistical Society. I think this is a problem for the industry in general. There is a survey fatigue everywhere. So the challenge is to find ways to keep the respondents engaged and, yeah, to better promote these surveys
Right.
using different platforms. I think, yeah, it's not only I think there is, as I mentioned, a questionnaire. Is it correct? Is it written in the right way? And so on. So, okay, so this is one part of the thing. But the other part is how to promote this survey,
Mm-hmm.
in order to
Mm-hmm.
make sure that people are aware that is happening. So I think the response rate is affected by these two main components, I would say.
Got it. Got it. And have you found any ways that have kind of worked for you to address that or maybe kind of come up with some solutions to help improve some of the response rates?
I would say exploring better data collection
Mm-hmm.
platforms. So first of all, we should use data collection platforms that allow advice agnostic approach. We have to remember that usually people will not stop these days to answer a questionnaire. They will do it sometimes on the go. Yeah. And we also need to find ways to reduce the length of the questionnaire as much as possible and keep it engaging and clear for everyone. For example, we can use some statistical techniques for questionnaire design to reduce it, like factor analysis, correlation, so on. And another interesting tool is the percentage bar. I'm sure you've seen that. The percentage bar somewhere on the screen to show the respondents how much left of the questionnaire still needs to be answered. And incentives, I would say, they usually help to get more people to answer the survey. So free subscriptions, vouchers, these sort of things. Yeah.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, we talk about that all the time at Question Pro, and I think a lot of people don't think about that, right? That, hey, the survey's got to be beautiful. It's got to be mobile optimized, right? I mean, especially if you're not, rewarding people or kind of have a captive audience. These people are clicking on a link and on the go, right? I mean, they're waiting in line somewhere, right? They're sitting on the bus or on the train, and they just want to get it done. It's got to be beautiful. It's got to work. You've got
Sometimes
to think
it's the only time they have, so it has to be boom, perfect.
I mean, they're doing you a favor, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. They're not going to sit down and say, hey, I'm going to spend an hour just on this, right? It's like, I saw it, I'm doing something else, and I'm bored, right? So let me go and do this while I'm on the go.
Yeah.
But then survey length, right? And I think a lot of people, maybe don't think about that all the time. It is the number of questions, but it's also what sort of randomization are you using? To your point, what's the statistical analysis that you're going to do in the background? So does every single person need to answer every single question? Or can you do some kind of smart randomization, smart logic, where you're still getting 50 questions answered, but each person is only seeing 15 or 20, right? I think these are all really important, interesting concepts to think about. Because at the end of the day, I mean, this is the bread and butter of the business, right? If people stop responding, then all of a sudden, you can't publish these rankings anymore.
Exactly. So, which is the topic of ascription, isn't it? That is something that people are talking a lot about these days. So, ascription is a methodology based on some statistical techniques that has been used to reduce, exactly as you said, to reduce questionnaire length and fatigue. So, on a nutshell, we basically ascribe the answers that a specific demographic group gave to a section of the questionnaire, let's say, to the same demographic group that didn't answer that section. Okay, so just to give an example, let's say that you and I are the same in the same demographic cluster. Okay, so let's say male, same age, live in the same area, same social grade, education, etc. And we are answering, let's say, for example, I don't know, a British Airways survey about a recent flight. So I've received one recently. Okay, so in the sample that I receive, or the population receiving, I will answer the satisfaction questions about the lounge. Let's say that I use the lounge and the cleanness of the aircraft. And you're in a different sample. You will answer about the food and the cabin crew. Okay, so use some stats techniques. We can ascribe my answers to the sections you didn't answer and vice versa. Okay, because we are part of the same hook, the same demographic cluster. Of course, we cannot do that for all sorts of surveys, and we have to be very careful when creating the demographic groups, or the hooks, as we call it. But it's been proved that it works, and it helps a lot in reducing the questionnaire length and fatigue and so on. We are using it here. And I remember when I was at Ipsos that we were using it all the time, because this is the way to, first of all, to reduce the questionnaire in a clever way, and in a very technical way as well. And yes, in the end of, once we do all the stats fusion and so on, everything works perfectly well. So it's definitely a technique that people should explore more.
Interesting. Do you kind of have any like high level rules on where you can use it and where you can't? Do you need a certain amount of responses in each kind of demographic, or is it based on sample size? How do you think about when ascription can be used and when it can't be used?
Yes, I think it works very well for satisfaction surveys. Yeah. But the most important thing is the demographic section. I think this is the thing that has to be very, very rich, let's say,
Right.
very well made, because you have to link different demographics, not only gender and age, but gender, age,
Hmm.
location, so on. So if you're a male and this age and living and earning, so you're part of this cluster. So
Right.
basically, the idea is that the answers you give for one thing, the other person that didn't answer would think basically the
Right.
same way. So it's not for everything. For example, open questions, not good for Ascription, because you can't put what I said to what,
Right.
exactly.
Right.
But in terms of ratings, if you rate something, I think it works perfectly well.
Got
And
it.
we need a very, very robust base size sample to do that.
Yeah. Makes sense.
But
Makes sense.
demographics, I think the section of the demographics, and let's say if we're doing for a satisfaction service, the overall
Hmm.
satisfaction is a factor that should be checked as well.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. So there's been a lot of talk recently around synthetic responses, right? Using
Mm,
AI and kind of machine learning to actually just use a past data set to predict how people would answer a future survey.
yeah.
And maybe you don't actually need as many, real respondents anymore, because you're kind of using synthetic data. Do you
Mhm.
think of that in the same light as this? Do you think that there's a way to use kind of purely synthetic data, or are we still pretty far off from that?
It's like ChatGPT. We can't use it here, but we
Right.
can study or assess different things. I mean, we can't use it here because I don't know how it would work. It's
Right.
something that we are studying. And it's something that is actually that we are going to do in 2024. Check this
Ah,
sort of
interesting.
synthetic answers to see
Interesting.
how, first of all, to understand fully and better how it works,
Yeah.
and then see if it would benefit us or not. But
Right.
at the moment, we are just, I would say, just reading a lot about it to
Yeah.
see. Yeah, it's like ChatGPT. We can't use it to write an article, but you can use to perhaps, think about ideas or,
Sure.
or have ideas or whatever.
Sure.
Yeah,
No, I mean, listen, we're in the very, very early innings of synthetic data. I mean, even just to
exactly.
hear that you guys are going to be starting to experiment with it in 2024, actually, I think is pretty quick.
Yes,
I
exactly.
mean, I think a lot of people are in wait and see mode on this, right? I mean, it's really hard to kind of get your head around not having real respondents answering a
Yeah,
survey.
it's a good thing for the younger generation. I mean, in my team, I have some like very young people that are always keen to help and to
Yeah.
explore this new technique. So let's see.
Tell us a little bit about the kind of the younger generation and engaging with the younger generation. I know a lot of your surveys have to go to kind of people in the younger generation. Obviously, you're thinking a lot about response rates. How do you specifically target that audience and keep them engaged?
That's a good question. This is something we are constantly checking because we need to find ways to keep the younger generation engaged with the service. Yeah? Because let's say for the business education rankings, these are the prospective students, yeah, that
Right.
will be in the business education perhaps in 2-3 years. So I believe I mentioned that to you already, but in our experience here, the problem is not that they don't answer surveys, they
Mm,
do. It's more about how to better promote a specific survey and catch their attention about it. So, for example,
right.
we still communicate or promote our surveys by email. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But we
Mm-hmm.
found out that inviting them to talk to us, we found out that for the younger generation, emails are not priority anymore, unless
Mm,
it's for something very formal. Okay. So we need to find other ways to promote the service using different platforms, perhaps LinkedIn or even Instagram and TikTok, right? Because the way they consume news or the way they get informed is different now.
right.
So we need somehow to follow these trends if you want to keep in the market. Yeah. So
Yeah.
well, they love incentives, and we always have to think about keep this questionnaire short. So think
Mm-hmm.
about descriptions and rewriting the questions all the time. There is a new wave. Keep them engaged and all the questionnaires device agnostic. And yeah, incentives. So usually, what we do is we give them, if they answer the survey, we give them 2 months FT subscription for free,
Mm.
and yeah, and they love it, of course.
Makes sense. Makes sense. It's it's something that we kind of hear, a lot, right? Like to me, I'm always an email, right? That's where I spend my day. And so an email comes across, it's like, okay, maybe I'll fill out this survey. But I think, with the younger generation, it's almost like you can't
Uh,
rely on email, right? And we see a lot of
yeah.
people integrating their surveys into WhatsApp distribution, SMS distribution, Instagram, TikTok, and finding that kind of angle, I think, is something everybody's got to be thinking about, right? Especially if you're going to be surveying the younger generation and thinking about them as a target audience, which is obviously crucial for these rankings. So it's interesting to hear that you're already playing around with some of those other distribution channels.
Yes, and as we were talking, TikTok, Instagram, yes, we can use these platforms to, let's say, to reach the young generation, but also we have to think about how we're going to communicate using this platform, because we have a brand and
Right.
FT and so on. So not to go like too down, but still keep the quality of the communication. So, but making the most of these channels.
Absolutely. Well, Leo, I can't believe we're already a half hour through, but this has just been an absolutely fascinating conversation. I think, to understand the storytelling process, I think is really interesting. And I think every market research, you don't have to be at a publication to start thinking that way, right? And I think
Exactly.
all of these things really do apply to any sort of research, right? You've got to think about engagement rates, response rates. You've got to think about your distribution channels. You've got to think about keeping the survey engaging, using smart statistical strategies like this to make sure that you're not asking a bunch of questions, or you're able to fill in the gaps. So Leo, thank you for such a fascinating conversation here. I know we're getting some comments. Craig, for anybody who arrived late, the recording will be available. Again, I definitely do highly recommend giving this one a rewatch, learning about Ascription and some of the things that FT is doing. So Leo, once again, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Asim. Thank you, Question Pro. I think it was a good conversation. Thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely.
Great.